Welcome back to the Live Better, Explore More podcast. I'm your host, Alan Mayseal, and they're back. I have with me Elece Hempel and Dave King. We're going to talk local ballot measures. We're going to do Measure Y, Measure I, and then we're going to jump into Prop 33. So welcome back.
Hey, Alan.
All right, urban growth boundary, Y. Not Y, but Measure Y. And since you have a little history with this one, why don't you dive in and let's get going. Why should we yes or no it?
Well, Measure Y is a city measure that was placed on the ballot by the City Council by a vote of 7-0 earlier this year. The history of it, and there's a long history of it, goes back to 1998. At that point, the council placed on the ballot an urban growth boundary that was to last for 20 years and freeze in the boundaries that were set in 1998, which were essentially very close to the existing boundaries at the time. And the concern, and it was legitimate, was that development was spreading very rapidly, particularly on the east side, and there was a concern that the city of Petaluma would eventually do what many cities around the Bay Area and in the country have done, which is to sprawl directly into the city that is next. For example, if you drive in the South Bay and a place like Palo Alto and Menlo Park, there really is no barrier between the two cities other than a street sign that says, "Welcome to Palo Alto" or "Welcome to Menlo Park." And that's true throughout a lot of the Bay Area, whereas in Petaluma at the time and still, we have one of the outstanding green belts in all directions. There is a little bit of a merge in the direction of Pengrove, but by and large, we have a green belt and haven't sprawled into the next city. The other reasons, the very practical reasons for doing it involve infrastructure expansion and the ability to provide services and cover an area from our police and fire departments and things of that nature. So this went on the ballot in 1998. It passed by close to 80% by my memory. So a very popular ballot measure, although I think it was a little bit misunderstood at the time. I think a lot of people thought it meant no more growth was going to happen in Petaluma, and obviously that is not the case, nor the intent of the ordinance. It was in place for 20 years. And in 2010, it was expanded to and placed back on the ballot to extend it from terminating in 2018 to terminating in 2025. That also passed with a very high percentage of the voting populace. Over the last few years, there's been calls, including my own call when I was on the council, to extend it so that we have something very close to what we have in place going forward into our future. And the city tied it into the new general plan, which is going to be coming out shortly, to extend the urban growth boundary for another 25 years from 2025, set to, if passed, will set to expire December 31, 2050. And there's a little bit of expansion within that urban growth boundary, but there's a limit of expanding over that period of a total of 120 acres. And as I mentioned, it passed unanimously. So whoever you like or don't like on the city council currently, they voted for it. That'll be up on your ballot here in Petaluma. The entire city votes on it, and it'll be on the ballot in November. I will be voting for it. I think having an urban growth boundary is good public policy. It gives us a sense of place and community. And I think it makes for better planning, and it makes for better ability to handle the infrastructure, water pipes, and so forth in a city. So that is my take on Measure Y.
So why do you think it's good public policy?
I do think it's good public policy. I also think it's important that our citizens know that a vote for Y doesn't cost them anything. What it does is it focuses, like Dave says, on where we develop and how we develop and what the development looks like in order to house the people that we need to house in our community. But it gives us that green belt, and there's so many people in our community that take advantage of that green belt, whether they're hiking along the trails back behind SRJC or even out, on the paths that take them around the city. And I think that, it's just one of those really, really important things that does really protect the community that we really want to retain and hold forward. There are a lot of other debates on overlay and those kinds of things that get muddled in what development looks like. This one's pretty clear and simple. A vote for why is really important. And the city of Petaluma history, there was a lawsuit. It was, was it before your time, Dave, that this
almost before my time period,
that the city of Petaluma tried to put this in place, and it actually got argued at the state Supreme Court because other cities were saying you can't do that, and the city proved that this urban growth boundary is so valuable to our community.
Yeah, the history there is that it was decided by the United States Supreme Court in a 1972 decision. And so the challenge probably started in the late 60s to get to the court. And at the time, I believe that was to limit the number of units permissible in any calendar year to 500. And this was in a city that was probably around 30,000 people at the time. I don't recall any year that I was on the city council that there was approval of or two categories, approving and then actually having construction, 500 units in any calendar year. So it was a pretty mild restriction 52 years ago. This one is, as Elece noted, it's a restriction on the boundary. It doesn't deal with the heights of buildings or the types of buildings or what can be built within the city. That is covered by the general plan. Or other aspects of the general plan. This is just how far out will construction be permitted within the city of Petaluma. And the expansion area that's anticipated is out by the Corona station, the second railroad station here in town that's going to be coming forward fairly soon. And there's some land out there that could be included in the urban growth boundary. I haven't seen the release of the ballot measure, so I can't tell you who's opposed to it. I'm not sure, there might be some opposition, but given the overwhelming support for it in the past, I would expect this to pass.
Okay. So this kind of ties in with Prop 30. I think it ties in with Prop 33. And I know we were going to go YI and then 33. And you kind of touched on it, that it doesn't talk about building height or what types of buildings within the boundaries, right, of the urban growth boundary. But it also doesn't address it. It was really designed, and I'm asking this question, it was really designed to just keep the buffer around the city.
Pretty much. Every city has a line on a map. Some of them are natural lines governed by rivers and other waterways. Most cities have just a line, and we have our line. And over the years, from 1858 forward, it expanded, and it eventually reached a point in 1998 where the leaders in the community, or many leaders in the community, not all, and there was some opposition back then in 1998, but it was overwhelmingly approved to set those boundaries. That is basically it. Now, and within that, those boundaries, by a vote of the council or a vote of the people, can be altered again if there's some dire need to expand the boundaries in the next quarter century. So it doesn't lack that flexibility, but it does allow for those boundaries to exist. And from a planning point of view, it allows the city government and the city to plan where they're going to have to provide the types of services that are currently being provided and may be needed in the future, such as wastewater, water delivery, fire districts and things like that.
Okay. So with Prop 33 and rent control, right? Everybody's favorite topic.
Yeah, it is everybody's favorite topic, and it's a tough one. If you watch the ads, you think, wait, am I supposed to vote yes because I want to protect tenants, or am I supposed to vote no because I want to protect tenants? And that's where Prop 33 always gets a little confusing, and the fors and the against have done a really good job of muddling the story, and you don't really even know which one you're looking to kind of support. I do. So, full disclosure, I run fair housing for the city of Petaluma. And so I'm working with landlords and tenants every day. Every day. It's not just now, but every day we are working with landlords and tenants. And the city of Petaluma put in place a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, as some up to where they can, restrictions on how landlords and tenants work with each other, especially when it comes to rent increases. And so the issue around the current would repeal the current 33, if it wins, would repeal Costa-Hawkins Rental Act, which then takes away the state's ability to limit what municipalities or areas that are governed by rent control or rent suppression, if you will, to move in a different direction. So every municipality could have their own set of rules around rent control. We did see with the current change in how our rent control works in Petaluma, a lot of single family kind of landlords who had maybe one or two kind of get out of the market because they felt it was too confusing. And so we have seen a loss in single family home renters. But that means that somebody was able to buy that home and live in that home too. So it goes either way. I don't think that the change in 33 would impact our residents in Petaluma because our rent control is really as high as high as it can go under the current law, and pushes the envelope a little in the restrictions on how much rent increase can happen and when it can happen. I also think that our city, if 33 passes, our city will do a really good job of educating our landlords and our tenants at the same time so that they all know what their rights are on that. So I'll turn it over to Dave because I'm sure he's got some, yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'll start out with how we make laws in California and the pros and cons of direct democracy, which is what this is. This is certainly an issue that our legislature could tackle. They did it in 1995 with the Costa-Hawkins Act. They've done it. If you read up on how many bills are passed in the state legislature that go to the governor's desk, it's hundreds, if not thousands, each year. And I'm, as a philosophy, I am of the view that we elect legislators to make law on complex areas. There are some things that are appropriate for direct democracy, and rent control is far more complicated as a public policy issue than simply controlling rents and calling people slumlords, which if you read the general election, it was which side was the slumlord. It was hard to tell. And they both accused each other of that and other things. So we have with Prop 33 a measure that's placed before the voters to make a decision that the legislature could have made. And a legislative body has the resources to look into the impacts on the construction of new housing that rent control may have an impact upon. Most economists that I've read have noted that rent control ordinances have a negative impact on the construction of new rental housing in a region. I don't know if that's gospel, but I've read a number of them, including people on the very liberal side of economic theory who have set forth that viewpoint. So that when we looked at it at City Council, because I was on the council when our rent control ordinance came up for consideration, and one of the major concerns I had with the way we did it was that this would have an effect on the rental market in Petaluma that was not intended, which was to remove smaller rental units out of the market. Apartments are not, they're going to rent, but and so I think a legislature could be more nuanced on how you go about putting together the best rent control mechanisms that a municipality can take a look at. And direct democracy, I think the votes are going to be more based on the ads that are seen, the materials received. And this is not to suggest that people are not intellectually capable of deciding public policy issues. We are, certainly. But most of us are not necessarily informed to the same degree as an investigative staff of a legislative body can be. So I start with that, and that kind of gives me my lean. I haven't decided on this one. I have watched rents and have real concerns about where they are in California, where they're headed without some kind of regulation. And, you know, I'm not of the belief that rent control is necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. And I'll probably look at this a little further, but I think those are the things that people should consider when they look at this. And this is not going to be a state, to be clear, this is not a statewide rent control ordinance. It's a measure that would allow municipalities to expand the degree to which they can have rent control ordinances. Right now, there's limitations on construction that was built after 1995. That was the Costa-Hawkins Act. A potential compromise would be that it's now been 29 years since that date was selected, that you pick a later date, that the housing that was built between 1995 and, say, 2010 that's on the market would not have the same chilling effect on being built. So I would have preferred a more legislative approach to this than simply putting it on the ballot and saying, here we go. And based on what I read in the ballot on both sides, we're not getting an honest argument from either side. We're getting a lot of ad hominem attacks. It sounds like a lot of our politics on a national level, as opposed to really informing. And I think that is also a problem for me going one way or the other. I will vote. I don't know which way.
And I think the point you made about it gives the responsibility back to kind of our local municipalities, whether it's Petaluma or another community within Sonoma County. And a lot of our communities within Sonoma County don't have the capacity to manage that. And so that becomes this complicated nuance. And honestly, I see it, and we have a large apartment owners who just, the way they get around the cap on the rent increase is they reform as a new LLC every 6 months and require the tenants to sign a new contract. So they're never in their place longer than a year, so it doesn't hit the cap mark. And so there's always ways around it, and we see it happening in Petaluma all the time. I mean, about every 6 months, everybody at certain large apartment complexes come in, and English is their second language, and they're asking us, should I sign this lease? Because they're telling me if I don't, I have to move out because it's a new corporation that's owning it. And so everybody's playing the game. And the big fact is we don't have enough housing for people that need the housing. And the community, a lot of members in our community don't want to hear that we need to build up. But I'm going to tell you, if we're going to house the people that work in our downtown and in our manufacturing companies in our city, we're going to have to add more housing up, within our urban growth boundary along the core of where transportation is, but we're going to have to add more housing layer units higher and higher in order to meet the demand. It doesn't matter how much rent control you put on these spaces. People need the housing, and they're not getting the housing because they're locked into these rents that are out of control. I just got a flyer for a new unit in Santa Rosa that is affordable housing, and for the 2 bedrooms, it's $2,953 a month. That's not affordable. And thank goodness, we were able to get into our housing before, but that's not affordable to anybody. And that's affordable housing in Santa Rosa. So it's not just Petaluma. It's a bigger question on how do we develop the right kind of housing for people to live in our community and work in our community. And that's that. I agree. You can't ask a voter to make that kind of decision, especially a voter who lives in their own home, to try to make a decision on somebody who's a renter, and how we're going to do that. And I think they've put this on the ballot twice now, and it's failed, in part because it's very confusing, and it looks like they tried to streamline the language on the pro, but it is very complicated, and I agree. It's one of those, I have to walk the middle line because I work with landlords and tenants, but I also know that most landlords in Petaluma are not going to gouge them. There are a few, and we know who the bad players are, and it's my job to provide that oversight and to be on them all the time to make sure that our tenants are represented. But I think it will impact our smaller apartment unit owners and some of our moms and pops. They're just going to say, I'm out of this business.
Yeah. How to me, this is me as a real estate advisor. How does the municipality want this rent control, right, or some form of it, and yet says no, maybe not no is not the right word, restricts development, right, within its boundaries, right, within its area of governance? It seems to me like we're not going to add enough units, and there's always too much, and then there's not enough. And so whatever the balance is hard to define. That's also complicated. But to say no or slow on growth and yes on a rent control measure seems like they're sidestepping. And I don't know, it seems like they're putting it on people who, and like Elece said, who the bad players are, right? But the mom and pops who have 2 rental properties in town, and that's kind of their retirement, or they're going to pass that on to the kids, get hammered with these things. Never mind, there's a cost to manage a rent control city, is there not? Don't you have to have staff to follow up on this?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And there's no dollars coming in to cover those additional costs. The amount of the grant money that I get to operate fair housing has stayed the exact same amount for the last 20 years since I've been at PPSC. The dollar has never gone up.
So it gets back to the reality is how you fund it, right? It's not like the landlords are going to pay a fee for the city to manage whether or not they're following the law. Right? And the tenant's not going to pay it, because if they could afford to pay that, we wouldn't be worried about rent. So how do we get there? How do we manage it if this were to pass?
Well, I think you're asking a question that goes well beyond Prop 33, and it's a good question. What I think has happened in the United States as I've gone from, a young guy and to now, is that we've priced, almost all of us, that aren't already in a home out of housing in most of the desirable places, which is anything near a significantly sized body of water, and some other locations as well. And I think it actually, at this point, it needs federal intervention in a large way. I know Kamala Harris is talking about a $25,000 loan program for first-time buyers. And that's a good thought, but I think and the other candidate isn't offering anything. So I think there's a need. I looked up the house I grew up in, and because somebody asked me how many square foot it was, I described it, and I said, I have no idea. It was a house that my father purchased a few years after World War II. And it was 1,200 square feet. And that includes the attic that was kicked out for housing, where my bedroom was, my brother's bedroom was. And it was more than adequate for our family, a family of 5, 6 with my grandmother there for a while. And it was not a huge lot. It was on a small lot, actually, and a lot of houses were kind of pretty close. And you can't get that kind of thing built in California. If you talk to a developer, they just tell you in some form or the other, it won't pencil out. And so tax incentives and federal laws that encourage builders when they come in, whether it's a condominium or a townhouse or a single family house, to build smaller units that naturally would be priced at a lower amount is required, so that you can't tell these people that you need to do X, Y, Z. That never works. They can wait you out. You're not going to, with a few exceptions, you're not going to be in city council for forever. Your city manager is not going to be there forever. The land will be there forever. And so they'll just wait you out till they get what they want, more or less, or don't do anything, which doesn't help matters either. So there has to be some kind of broader approach to this, and recognition that a starter home for a young couple should not start at $1 million. That a family of 4 or 5 or 1 or 2 that lives in an apartment that takes up such a substantial portion of their income that they can't pursue happiness in a meaningful way is unconscionable, and that a lot of it is based on lack of availability and competition. Some of it's now based on larger organizations going around and buying up properties and basically turning them into securities regulation type investment, equity investments, and they're adjusting the housing markets in certain places. So there needs to be something addressed there, and the only way to do that, state level, local level, it's not going to. If we could do X, Y, and Z in Petaluma and produce something, but there's always so much space you can build it on, and so many developers are willing to build it. You have to do it nationwide, and I don't see anybody. I see Kamala Harris at least trying to address it. I hear some of the people in Washington and in California trying to address it, but trying and succeeding are two different things, and it's reached a crisis point. The other group of people, there are people that are in a home, and then they go to look for a smaller unit in their town. As you know this better. You know all this better than I do. They barely exist if it does, and if it does, it's priced so high. You look at what you're getting, what you're trading. You're thinking you're getting conned, and so it doesn't happen. And so you have people staying in larger homes longer than they need to or want to, and those houses are not on the market for younger folks. And it's a cycle that's developed over a long period of time. In a place like California, I don't care what the national rent is a very desirable place to live.
True. Well, that's the issue, and with the $25,000, credit first time, that sounds good, but if you don't build, you're just going to drive prices up.
Right.
Yeah, that's not really gonna help. It sounds good and it's a nice soundbite.
So,
but that just gives more people the opportunity to get into the buying pool, which then drives the prices up. Which then 25,000 is not enough. Now they need 50.
yeah, and I think in Petaluma we've been very hesitant to do multifamily kind of housing. So condos, townhouses, those kinds of things, which is less land but more people to own. And I think no matter where we end up with 33, the city of Petaluma is going to have to look, and I know that they're looking at that with their general plan on what you can actually build in Petaluma to meet the needs of our community.
Right. And then with that, let's just roll into Measure I, childcare, because if you can't afford the house, childcare is going to make it even harder. Yeah. So it's a quarter percent sales tax, right? That doesn't sunset. And we're currently here in Petaluma that this 0.25% puts us at the max that we can tax. Yeah. So what do we do?
Our current sales tax is 9.5%. And among the things that covers is the 7% state sales tax, which Petaluma gets some money from, but not a lot. The 1% sales tax that was passed in 2020, Measure M, and the open space district, the transportation measure that was passed countywide, the smart train, and there's a library tax that's actually up for renewal, which is 0.125%. And there may be another that I've missed from memory. This is a good cause looking for a way to pay, have a way to pay for it. So the question really is less, at least when I say it's a good cause in my view, in that it would provide funding for childcare, preschool, and early childhood education for low and middle income children and families in Sonoma County, and the local children's health care safety net. I don't know that anybody could argue against that. I mean, I suppose people could. The question is whether a sales tax measure of this nature that puts us up against the maximum we can go by state law is the best use of that last bit. And that, to me, is the main question that's presented here. I don't know if there was anything else that was coming. I mean, part of this is who gets in line first, and it's mostly county measures. Right. I mean, the city of Petaluma got in there and finally got something passed. But it really actually also ties into Prop 5, which I think if we have time we should discuss, because we really are limited in a county like Sonoma in large measure to sales tax measures because of the restrictions placed by Prop 13 currently on using or increasing property taxes, and the reluctance of people to mess with property tax increases, or somewhat reluctance. So it's really a question of what the best funding mechanism is for these programs, and this may be it. And it may be simply we just go to 9 3/4 and that's it for the moment.
I think Measure I is really important, in part because we've made such great strides with the work that we've done with early childhood, and that was paid for in the past by a tax on tobacco. And one of the things that we've done really, really well, especially in Sonoma County and across California, is we have stopped smoking so that we're not earning as much money on the sales tax for tobacco use. And that's why it would roll back all of the strides that we've made in early childhood, quality childcare, and the starts of education. We have a lot of people who their kids were in preschool during COVID, and those kids don't know how, because they were trying to do preschool over Zoom. Those kids are falling behind in math and reading in third and fourth and fifth grade because they didn't have access to that quality child care that they were getting. And I think the other piece that we often forget when we talk about improving the quality of education is improving the pay of the people who are actually providing that quality education. And those that are in preschool and childcare are probably our lowest paid individuals in our community. And for them to actually be able to get some educational credits and be able to earn a living doing childcare and not having to work a second job after the kids leave at the end of the day. That to me is really, really important, and is one of the reasons why I really do support this is the second time around. They hired somebody to do signature gathering in the past, and the signature gathering person was not doing it correctly. And so they've had to take another bite at the apple with this eye. And I think this will be their last chance to come back and put this in front of the voters. And I would hope that people understand that, that quality early childhood leads to more success in school and then more successful adults in our community.
And I think many people comprehend that, and I you can see it, with the kids that have received it.
Mm-hmm.
I seem to have a step up. I think that's where the trend for pre-K schooling is going. I think in California and elsewhere around the country, hopefully. And talking about the sales tax, that is Petaluma alone.
Right.
I'm not talking about any other municipality or the county area in Sonoma County, because I don't have their sales tax memorized offhand, but I do know we're kind of at the ceiling or getting close to it. And I think, my lean on this is to vote for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it needs 2/3.
Yeah.
So
it does. And so that takes us to Prop 5.
Right.
Sorry, doing your job.
It's about time. It's getting hard here asking all these questions.
Yeah.
All right, so Prop 5, right? That's the lower the supermajority requirement to 55% for local bond measures to fund housing and public infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, to be clear, when you say housing, it's affordable housing. And by affordable, it's not market-based affordability. It's government-subsidized affordable housing. As you know, there's a huge difference between affordable housing, we'll call it with a capital A, and some housing that doesn't cost that much. By way, I know we don't have lowercase affordable housing here in California, but say for example you went to the Dakotas, you might be able to buy a house, a 3-bedroom house, or rent an apartment for something that would be considered much more reasonable by California standards in the market. This is money that would be provided to assist in the construction and maintenance of affordable housing for people who qualify based on income and other standards. And Elece knows very much about this. But in terms of the structure of the law, this would reduce from 67 or 66.67% to 55% the vote of the needed by voters to provide for bonds against property tax for affordable housing and infrastructure, such as constructing, a crosstown connector by way of hypothetical options here in Petaluma.
you just pulled that out of your hat?
Yeah, I was just a guess. I have a vague memory of having discussed that for the better part of 8 years, off and on. And so, currently we have, I think, the 66.67 is way too onerous for any measure. Personally, I think that it allows a third of the people that are voting on a particular measure to dictate what otherwise the vast majority would want. And we had a measure here, it's unrelated to infrastructure or housing, about 10, 12 years ago on parks.
Yep.
You got 64% of the vote. It didn't pass.
Yeah.
So 36% of the voters prevented 64% of the voters from taxing themselves to do a specific thing that we wanted. And I say we because I voted for it. And that happens all the time in California. And you can do a general tax at 50%. But if you want to specify, which more people are inclined to do, in their thinking, they think, I just want to give money to the government to do whatever they want to do with it. If you tell me this money is going to go to this, I'm in. Unfortunately, getting to 66.67 is no mean feat. And many a good measure that the vast majority of people in a municipality have wanted, or the state have wanted, has gone down. So I think reducing it to 55 still gives an enormous amount of power to 45% of the voters in a given municipality voting on these measures. And I think we should be able to decide by even a semi-super majority what we want. We have too much of that in Washington, where the minority of the voters in this state are dictating our policy in the United States Senate and through the Electoral College. And there's a benefit to protecting the minority viewpoint, but there's also a detriment of telling the majority viewpoint consistently to kiss off.
Yeah.
So you make a good case?
Yeah, he makes a great case. And I think that the only thing I would add is if you're not registered to vote now, get registered to vote. It's important. You can do it online. You can pick up the registration, voter registration. Pay attention. Understand. The ads are a little confusing, but if you pick up the documents and read what it is, you can make a decision on your own. And yes, I know where I'm going to vote, and yes, at my house, the voter pamphlet is all laid out with everything that I'm voting for and circled. And I hope that if people in my house are reading it, but if they're not, I know that they're voting. And that to me is a very, very important piece of what is coming to us in November, is an opportunity to have our voice heard in how we decide on these things. And so, yes on why. I believe yes on why. And I still don't really know where I am on a 33. And 5, yes.
Yeah, and that brings up you bring up one really good point about registering to vote, and for many people, somebody was asking me this just the other day. We get a brochure from the state, and that's statewide measures and statewide votes, and then you get your county pamphlet, which has Measure I, Measure J, those measures in it. So you get those separately, and I don't think my county-wide one has.
Yeah, we haven't gotten the county, but we have gotten the state, and it's important to vote.
Yeah, absolutely. Regardless of who you vote for or what you vote for,
exactly,
it's important to be heard.
So that's just 4 topics we covered, and 2 of them are a little more complicated, right? They're not that's an easy answer, right? So. I'll ask this last question, and then we'll just call it a day. What would you say, Dave, would be the bet for people who are new to the area? Where do I get my information? What is the best? Is it that pamphlet, or is there some other source where they can get unbiased? Here's what it says. Here's what it means.
Well, I don't think they're unbiased exists anywhere, and we all have a bias. You heard our biases in the last half an hour or so. I think you get good information from the voter pamphlets. I think if you're talking about a specific candidate, you can go to their websites or their materials. Attend, if you're deciding, for example, in the city council, go to a forum and see the people. Local elections are not like president. You're not going to meet the 2 candidates for president and have a chance to talk to them. You will have a chance to talk to the people running for city council. They'll probably come to your doorstep and talk to you. So I think those are some sources that you can use. Talk to your friends, talk about it a little bit. In a presidential election year, I think we all, and I'm guilty, very guilty of this, tend to talk about that race to the exclusion of all the others. And in part in California and probably other parts of the country, we don't have a lot of contested races. Our assembly race and congressional race here in our districts, they're not, I mean, we know who's going to get elected, and they're not, it's not a real battle. But the president really gets to everybody, their emotions and their feelings and all that, and to sometimes the neglect of local politics. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the specific propositions and ballot measures, the League of Women Voters is a good source, I think. God, what was the other one? I'm blanking on the name of the other. There's another organization that analyzes all the measures. A news organization that I think is about as balanced as you can get is Cal Matters. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can only get them online. You just type in Cal Matters, and you can kind of navigate it from there. But it's based only on California issues, so it won't help you with the federal election, but it will help you with the propositions and with some of the candidates that are running and other information about California. It's a great source of information.
I did have a question that came up today because people still are trying to wrestle with the district elections, and they're like, wait, how will I know if it's in my district? You will know because you already, if somebody is knocking on your door, if you're in that district, and there are lots of opportunities, but we're not so big and the districts aren't so big. Call the candidates. They'll come over and talk to you. They'll come talk to your neighbors. It's important as community members to do your homework on those candidates and really understand what's at the root of why they're running and what they want to bring forward. And I often say, which is why I was always a big supporter of Dave King, is listen to them listen. Because a good candidate is going to listen to you also. And that's the one thing Dave was always really good at is hearing all sides of the argument and then balancing that conversation and bringing it forward and using his vote at dais. I think it's really important to listen to your candidates. Listen, if you can do that, but watch how they listen and watch how they respond back to you after they've heard what you said. I think those are really key, important things when it comes to, especially to our local candidates.
Perfect. We'll end with that. Thank you both very much.
Right. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Dave.